Good morning. You're listening to DC Comics Rush Hour, podcast for DC Comics fans by a DC Comics fan. Well, my experiment yesterday went pretty well. If you listened to the episode, then you know that everything worked just fine on the new phone using the Spreaker Studio software on the Android phone. So yay, I have a smaller studio that I can carry around now. That works well. So I'm kind of in a weird mood or conundrum or whatever this morning. I was all set this morning to talk about Supergirl. Watched it last night. Yes, on my day off. We talked about that yesterday briefly. Day off on that, but no big deal. Ready to talk about Supergirl. Good and bad and everything else. And then this morning, while cooling off after the shower, I decided to sit down and read one of my comics from last week that I hadn't gotten to. A big one, Metal number 3. And wow, it put me in a mood. So I think I am going to let that one soak in a little bit. I'm going to talk Supergirl. If I seem negative at any point, part of it is probably due to the Metal number 3 influence. So stick with Supergirl for now. Episode 2, Psy. This was much better. This is what I was looking for. Maybe not this specific episode, but this kind of comeback to the character after season 1, or not season 1, after the season finale of last year. Still haven't done anything with Mon-El. Still waiting to find out, where he is. Again, I'm hoping that they deal with the future and the Legion. I don't know if they'll do that, or if they'll just have him in the Phantom Zone for a while. I don't know which way they'll go with it. But either way, still waiting on that. And I should go ahead and say spoilers before I get any further in. Alright, so the characters all felt like the characters. And last time, the first episode, all the supporting cast did a really good job, but Supergirl fell off. Well, Supergirl felt perfect this time. The villain, she did a great job. I should look up the actress's name. But Psy, the villain, did a fantastic job. I am hoping they bring her back at some point. You got Wynn, you got Alex and Maggie, you got John, you got Lena, Jimmy, Miss Tessmacher even, and Supergirl herself. And nobody felt forced into the story. Everybody felt very organic. And I did leave one out on purpose. I'll come back to her. But everybody felt very organic, like there was a role there. They didn't overdo it. If their part of the story was small, fine, it was small. They weren't going to give them more than what their part needed. Everybody's acting was spot on. The villain was a very good villain that, while she didn't have to physically do a lot, she got across the menacing side of bringing fear to people. So she's a psychic who, her power is to psychically invade your mind and make you experience your greatest fear. That way, as she walks into a bank, for instance, everybody just kind of curls up into a ball, afraid, passes out or not, and she can just walk in and take the money and walk out. Fairly effective. And if anybody tries to stop her, they end up in the same situation, which is what happens to Supergirl. In the meantime, we're also dealing a little bit, in this time more humorous way, with the Alex and Maggie wedding that's coming. We deal with the Lena Luthor buying of Catco. We have a little bit still. They don't just completely have Kara getting over Mon-El just overnight, instantly. That part felt much better. It's like everything about this story felt much more organic and, real as compared to the first episode. There are a couple of complaints. So, let me get into those. One is the same thing that we complain about on The Flash quite a bit. B-Man and I have talked about it. I've heard other people talk about it. It's just... It's unfortunate that writers don't know how to write for this. You've got these incredibly powerful characters. Supergirl, Flash, Superman, Firestorm, different characters with powers that are very, very powerful. An ordinary human, most of the time, should be no match for them. Even some augmented, whether it's genetically or mechanically, electronically, whatever, but even augmented humans probably can't take care of them or stand up to them most of the time. However, they have a story they want to tell, and so they write our heroes in such a way as to not actually take advantage of their powers, take advantage of the situation, and they have to actually act dumb or act against their own nature in order for the story to move forward. That happens, again, to the Flash all the time. He should be able to rush in to a situation, tie up the bad guy, and then stop and throw out his quips and be funny. Instead of rushing in, stopping at a convenient distance from the villain, talking for a while to give the villain a chance to do what the villain's going to do. And that's what Supergirl does this time. Now, you can forgive it on the very first occasion. So they don't know how the bad guy is just walking into the bank and walking out. Supergirl flies in, stops, and because she is so powerful, I have a feeling her and Superman both have that just kind of innate feeling of no worry, that they're going to be okay. So there's not as much caution that just comes naturally to them. I'm not saying no caution, but just not as much, and not a paranoia level like Batman. So she flies in, doesn't know what's going on, and then gets hit with the fear stuff. Okay, first time makes perfect sense. Second and third time no longer makes sense. She knows what her power is. She could fly in so fast that Sai would never have a moment to react. She could hit her from a distance with heat vision, which she showed she was not against doing. She tried to hit her with heat vision from the other side of the parking garage, but she got close enough that Sai was aware she was there and dodged. Why not just be hanging way, way, way up in the air and hit her with the heat vision from a long distance? She's capable of it. But okay, let's give her that. In the middle of the fight, at one point, Supergirl lashes out with super breath and blows her back into the car. It works for a moment. She throws her off balance, almost knocks her down, and then stops. Why not another blast and another blast and another blast, and then rush over really fast while she can't do anything? Tie her up and you're done. Or thump on the head once and she's knocked out, or whatever. It would not be hard. So they wanted to have this story, have Kara deal with her fear that she killed Mon-El by sending him off into space in the spaceship. Her greatest fear, or her most fearful moment ever, was when she was shot off into space as Krypton exploded. Her ship is damaged. It's spinning there in space. She's all by herself. Everybody she knows just died. She's helpless. It's silent. She's trapped. I get it. That makes perfect sense. But they wanted to show that so much and have her deal with that and work through it, that they needed to give the villain more chances to hit her with her fear power so that she had more chances to work through it, so it wasn't all at one time. Again, all makes sense. Write it better. Write it in some way that it makes sense, so that it's not Supergirl or any other character not using their brains to be the most effective. Alan Moore was brilliant at that. Now, I'm not saying was because he's gone. He's not writing for DC anymore. But Alan Moore was brilliant at that, of being able to show weakness but not show stupidity. Look at the Swamp Thing Superman crossover for a good example of that. For the man who has everything, there's so many good examples in Alan Moore's writing of him being able to write for a godlike character and it not come across like he's having to write down to the characters or write down for the readers. He's able to create the story using those characters and using those characters' abilities that fit. We need Alan Moore level writing when we're writing characters like this. We need Jeff Johns level writing. There's several things we need, and while the writers did a good job on a lot of the story, and I loved the overall story, when I finished the episode, I felt, yes, Supergirl's back. This week is when it felt like she's finally back. Don't get me wrong, I loved the episode, but that method of dealing with the villain still bothers me. So that was one thing. Beyond that, you still have we know it's a budget thing where John Johns, who's a telepath, he got involved once briefly, but not anymore. Why not? I get it. That one's budget. I'll go with that one. That one's minor. That one I wouldn't even bring up if there wasn't other stuff. Now the other big one, and then a minor at the end. That's really not a complaint, just more of I wish they'd gone a different direction. The minor one is. Or not minor one, but the other bigger one is we get drilled into us in shows like 24 and lots of different movies that the government and different agencies have such good tracking ability, the ability through satellites and everything else to track any individual or any individual car or anything else through the streets and around the world, and they have a hard time, the bad guys have a hard time getting away. We're just shown constantly how fantastic our intelligence service can be with all the technology they have today. But it seems like every single villain, whether they have superpowers or don't have superpowers, whether they're mundane, enhanced, or whatever, they all do actually have one superpower. They have the superpower to disappear without a trace. In situations where you should still be able to trace them, you know where they are, they're not really doing all that much to try to hide, but no one can find them again. Again, you would think the DEO would have that level of technology based on everything else you've seen. Maybe it's not fair to compare them to everything else, but that's the world we live in, and that's kind of the situation. So, dealing with the villain, not the villain herself, and not the fear stuff that resulted from it, just the intelligence of dealing with a villain was my complaint with this episode. Everything else about it was fantastic. But since it happened 2 or 3 different times and ways, I have to knock him a little bit on that. And it was definitely not a 5-star out of 5. I'm struggling to whether or not to give it 3.5 or 4. I'm somewhere in that range, 3.5 to 4 stars. The emotional and character stuff was 4+. The dealing with the villain and everything else was 3 or less. So we'll see. So I mentioned I left one character out earlier, and that's the villain, Rain. I think the actress and her daughter are doing a fantastic job. Probably the actress more than the daughter, but the daughter did great. There was nothing against her, and that's the better direction for it to go, since you would assume the mom, Rain, is going to have probably a bigger part in the story long term. So that was really good. I enjoyed everything about her. I was worried with how they kind of clumsily introduced her in the first episode. This episode was fantastic for her. And then a nice surprise ending. It turns out she is who is going to be running Luthor Corp, or L Corp. I think it's L Corp now. She's the one running L Corp while Lena is over running Catco. So that's a great twist and way to bring all the characters together. And it'll be interesting to see how they interact. Rain and Supergirl interact, because she's already been saved. Her and her daughter were saved by Supergirl very clearly, and so she would have nothing but respect for her daughter. She seems like a really good person. Will she turn evil? Will she turn bad? Will there be something in her programming that causes that? I don't know. Or just her existence? We'll have to wait and see. So, intriguing there. And for people who don't know anything about Rain, I really would love to know how they feel going through this. Wondering what's going on. Is it another superhero or whatever? They're probably wondering many other things. Okay, so the final minor complaint. They dealt with Mon-El quite a bit, and did a really good job of dealing with Mon-El, I thought, or the repercussions and the emotional state and everything else for her. There was some lines said near the end that felt like they should be going there and showing us where Mon-El is. It felt like that's where they were leading, and then they just didn't. Instead, we swerved to John sitting in a bar having a drink and getting a message from Magan that he's needed on Mars right away. Okay, that's cool. Nothing wrong with that, and nothing wrong with the fact that they didn't do anything with Mon-El, other than they just felt like they were leading up to that in such a big way that it felt weird that they didn't. So that's where we are. Supergirl for this week. Fantastic episode. Again, 3.5 or 4 stars, whereas last week was 2.5 to 3. Maybe I should give it S shields or something. I don't know. But really enjoyed it. Much more so this week. Looking forward to next week, going to Mars, seeing what all happening there. Sounds good. And I'll have to decide whether or not I'm going to talk Metal 3 tomorrow, or if that's something I'm going to hold off for a couple days on. Do I need to reread it once? Do I need to go back and read some of the other Metal stuff first, and then decide just how bad I think it is, or is it worse than I thought? There's a little preview of my thoughts on it. Anyway, almost at work. So this is John Paul, the old Titan himself, minus a B-Man. DC Comics Rush Hour, signing off. Long live the Legion.